Welcome back to the Policy Viz podcast. I'm your host, John Schwabish, once again for your journey around data visualization. And this time, on this episode and this week, I'm joined by my good friend, Andy Kirk, who I haven't seen in many ages. It is good to see Andy, have him back on the show. We talk about a lot of stuff. Andy has a new book, a new edition of his book, so we talk about that. We talk about the future of data visualization. We talk about client work. We talk about AI, of course. We're going to talk about AI and how it's going to impact our field going forward. If you've never got a chance to listen to me and Andy talk, I think you're going to enjoy this one. We basically just have a good time. It's always good to see Andy. So I'm not even going to delay any further. Here's my conversation with Andy Kirk from Visualizing Data. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Here you go. There he is. Look at that good-looking guy. There's Noah behind you. Sorry. You got your info. I didn't even know. You got your Information's Beautiful trophies above you. You've got your big data viz.
Well, you know what with those, right? So they're the victorious trophies from 2015 and 2016. And the question is, at what point is a trophy no longer a badge of honor?
Does it have an expiration date on it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's now. Oh God, has he still got those up?
Well, there is. So so now it's like the Data Viz Society Award. It's like Data Viz Society Awards brought to you by Information is Beautiful, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So those are like those have value now. That's like the Matchbox car that there's only like 6 of them. That's what you've got.
Well, there you go. We'll see. For now,
how are things?
Very good, mate. Thank you. Yeah, all good. Yeah. Busy, which is never something I take for granted, even after 15 years ish, I think, freelancing. Yeah. But I still wake up every day thinking this could be the last day where I'm in demand. But I don't take that for granted, especially in the context that I do know that there's a general market slight slowdown, a little dip in the road right now that I know that there's a few people experiencing. So I'm very sort of aware of that that kind of privilege to still be busy and still be busy in lots of different things, which means I keep stimulated because they're all different things, but they all sort of fit into the same central premise. So can't complain.
You seem busy. I got your newsletter this morning. That's always fun to get. You've got a new book out, or a new edition of the book.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff going on. I do want to talk about the book, but I want to. We talked a couple months ago now on your podcast. I think maybe a couple months ago. I wanted to get your sense of where things are in the field. Like, what's the state of data viz? Social media is sort of dispersed now, so that's changed the nature, I think, of conversation and debate. Like, how are you feeling these days about data viz, sort of generally?
I think we're at a very interesting junction, and I guess that kind of slightly caveated phrase means that I don't quite know if this junction going forward is all going to be rosy. There's a golden path still ahead, or if we've just reached a point of, I don't think it's saturation or like full maturity, but there's certainly something going on whereby maybe a lot of the things that we were having discourse around and wondering about when will this be solved in the early 2010s, maybe a lot of that stuff has just been boxed off.
Yeah.
So things like the maturity of certain tools. We've talked about use of things like Flourish and Data Wrapper in that podcast that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And those tools are alongside all the others. The Power BIs, the Tableau of the world. They've really given people such a powerful means to create more things that they wish to create, and with pretty good practices as the underpinning of how they're organized, albeit still loads of room for creativity and modifying. But it does feel to me that there is there's an excellence in the data viz field in terms of the diversity, the talent, the energy that's still there. I think the fragmentation through social media is a big issue. It feels like we've
Mm-hmm.
got a partial view, we've got a partial jigsaw puzzle, and it's hard to know where the patterns are. It's hard to know where all these things join together. It feels like we've got a bunch of kind of archipelagos of people. There's a little kind of emerging community on Blue Sky. Then you've still got some Twitter people. You've still got the kind of LinkedIn, but it's a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I've done. Here's what I've achieved.
Yeah.
Congrats to me, sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's the Instagram, the cool stuff, but it's hard to sort of piece all that together into a cohesive picture of what's going on right now and who's in there. But it still feels. I mean, it's easy for me and us to say because we're inside it. It still feels just from the anecdotes of working with people who are in normal organisations doing this, not part of the field but doing data viz, that there's still a huge way to go
Mm-hmm.
before anyone can say, yeah, we've nailed that, we've mastered data viz as a practice
Mm.
internally. But perhaps with all these tools and with all these references, all these books that we've all written, maybe there's a sense now that they don't need as much help from outside,
Yeah.
that maybe people inside can solve these things. But then, the question that we always ask is, so what's the difference it's making? What's the effect it's having? And that, to a certain degree, beyond the public stuff, news media, for example, that is the stuff that always has and will remain elusive because it's behind the four walls of
Mm-hmm.
corporate undertakings.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with all that, and I wonder where the data viz field, again, there's so many different parts of the data viz field, so it's sort of hard to say like the data viz field, right? Because there's
Yeah,
the researchers, there's the there's the designers, there's the
yeah, yeah,
computer science. um, I just wonder where all these different groups see things, where people see things going, right?
mm,
Do we need, are there advancements in tools yet to make? Is it, should we be focusing maybe on the practitioner, freelancer, trainer side? Should we be focusing more on the data prep side? I mean, I don't know about you, but that's kind of the part I've generally sort of avoided. Like, kind of like, you've got some data, let's talk about visualizing it. There's a
yeah,
whole boatload of stuff that goes on behind it.
absolutely right. I mean, I think part of the reason why, we were chatting before, but part of the reason why that is either hard to do or easy to not do
Mm.
is that, first of all, every context is unique in the treatment that you need to give the data, the way that you need to transform it, prepare it, configure it, ready for its huge usage. Sorry, and therefore to train people to do that is hard to hard to narrow down two or three reliable case studies that will cope, give people most situations a way to cope. Um,
Yeah.
so I generally talk in quite general terms about data collecting and transformation, and I know that in my mind when I'm saying all this stuff across, let's say, 30 slides
Yeah.
of a course, that is something that needs 300 slides.
Yeah.
But it's always like, oh well, don't worry about it. Well, let's just get to the cool stuff. I also think though that it's something that you can be complacent about in your own abilities to get from A to B with just the built-in muscle memory that you've developed over years of how to quickly get a table in Excel into shape,
Yeah.
how to reconfigure it for Tableau long and thin, or into Flourish with all the unique sort of datasheet layouts you need each chart type to be plugged into,
Right.
that you kind of forget that not everyone does know necessarily how to quickly copy and paste a column and stick it at the bottom, then repeat it and do VLOOKUPs and even just write a little bit of VBA code to automate a loop. And so there is a curse of knowledge there, which I do feel guilty of, that I need to address that in my materials.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, to your point, I do think that is perhaps where the next focus has been. We have for many years talked about the little viz, certainly myself included,
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
minute details, and maybe at this point in time, not just in data viz, but in the world as it is right now, that stuff needs to be just put aside for now. Let's
Yeah.
care about some more important stuff, which is why are we doing this? What's the thing you're trying to tell people or let them understand? And maybe the bigger chunk of all this hidden iceberg, which is the heavy lifting of the data side.
Yeah. It is interesting. I use I'm not a Python coder, but I've been using ChatGPT to like write code to like
Likewise.
scrape out of like like pulling to do hockey viz just kind of for fun. And I do wonder whether AI changes that calculus for people, right? You
Mm,
don't necessarily need to know, well, from my own experience, I'll say, hey, I want to scrape this table off of hockeyreference.com on this page, and, I'll give it a prompt. Oh, okay, here's the code, copy, paste it, run it. I'll
mm.
say, even at the beginning, I was like, how do I even run Python code, right?
I
Okay, it
did
tells me how to
the
write it, right?
exact same thing, yeah.
Right, run it. Okay, here's an error. Oh, I got this error. Okay, this is how you fix it. Oh, okay, now it runs. Um, People can do that obviously with VBA. It can do that with
Mm,
all these tools. And the funny thing about ChatGPT is you'll say fix this, it'll fix it, and then it'll explain to you all the changes that it made, and it'll be like, I don't actually care. I'm not
mm.
trying to learn Python. I'm just trying to accomplish a task.
Yeah, yeah,
And to your point, a lot of the little viz is more aesthetic, design, subjective, human, right? Where the
yeah,
AI can't really answer some of those questions.
yeah. But
And so
it's also the
yeah,
place where the subjectivity exists, right? It's where the rules
right,
don't have a touch point because it is so open in those bits of our world for there to be several right answers.
yeah,
The the thing is that when you've got that chat GPT intervention is are you able to validate it with your own eyeballs? So
yeah,
you can look back at that original hockey table that you've scraped and you can do like 10 quick checks. If that's looking
right,
right, if that's looking right, I'm pretty sure. And don't get me
yeah,
wrong, humans will make mistakes even if they do it by hand. So it's not that,
yeah,
we're flawless, but when you then introduce such assistance by some other tool to do this on mass where there could be more jeopardy of it getting, you know, let's imagine there's a merged cell in a table.
yeah,
These are always happening. And it doesn't handle that correctly, and it's won out, and then everything's won out. Do you
right,
have the scope to be able to check those things? So that's where there's still that, I guess, that hesitancy, but it shouldn't mean that we shouldn't use these tools. And I've done exactly the same with Python. Never learnt it, but now I feel that I've got a route into it without having to
yeah,
learn it.
yeah.
But it is
And
the
I think
logical place for AI to live.
yeah, and I think there's a difference between messing around. I want to make a line chart of Alexander Ovechkin's goals, and doing an analysis that's going to affect people's livelihoods or how
100%.
they
Yeah.
get their benefit, right? Like, so
Yeah.
there's a
The
little bit of
triviality of the
like,
topic. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, who cares if I get the Ovechkin thing wrong because ESPN's going to do it right. So,
Yeah.
um, or even just like I'm doing it kind of as a hobby, whereas you worked with Arsenal, as I recall. Was it
Yeah.
Arsenal, right? So
Yeah.
like your work with them, like it's a little bit different when you're like working with the team because they're
Hmm.
making decisions
Yeah.
based on your analysis, and
Yeah.
that's a different story. Um, I wonder what your take is right now on um, critique in the field, because when we were sort of coming in and the Twitter data viz was all a rage, like there was always a lot of conversation about what is the right sort of level and
Mm.
temperature and attitude around
Mm.
critique. And I don't know, has the fragmentation of social media, has that changed your calculus? Do you think of it differently now?
A little bit. I think partly because the fragmentation means that the communities that are popping up are a little bit smaller, a little bit more intimate, a bit more personal, and at this point, still friendly and still convivial and still kind of constructive. I think when things become so huge, I mean, not to pick on this, but think about Reddit. When everything's
Mm-hmm.
so huge, so voluminous in traffic of people, and so largely anonymous, the gloves are off a little bit more so than when you've got a person that you're interacting
Yeah.
with. But in terms of the actual nature of the critique, I think it's I do think we've come a long way in letting things go. even
Yeah.
if we don't necessarily subscribe to the choices that we witness, we've done enough laps of this world to know that there's probably a reason why they've done that.
Yeah.
And rather than me say, "Oh, I hate that red that you've picked," we can probably think, you know what, they've probably been given that as a limited palette to pick from.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a design criteria. They've probably tested it with a certain print, whatever it may be. So I think when you have been around the block a few times, you are able to sort of just step off the gas a little bit and think, you know what, I'm sure if I understood the real context of that thing, that that would be fine. That would be the least
Yeah.
worst solution rather than the best. So I think there's just almost certainly from my perspective, there's a little bit less of let's pounce on this thing and start to
Yeah.
point out the ways it could be improved. But I think that last point there is important, is that, and it's always stood the same way, which is if you're going to have a go at something in terms of it's not good or the ways that it's not showing the best practices, you've got to back up with why and what you do
Yeah.
differently. And the what you do differently, therefore, needs to be cognizant of what the context was. I mean, 17 years into this film, we're still saying it depends, and for good reason, because it does. You don't know what people have been encountering.
Yeah. But back to the tools then, it becomes a lot easier to take someone's design. I haven't done this, but I
Mm,
assume it's easier now to drop it into one of these, like Midjourney or AI image tools and say,
mm,
"Hey, change all the red color to blue."
yeah,
And so in some ways the critique, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for critique, because it doesn't require you to think as hard necessarily. Like, what are the constraints when you build that thing, that
yeah.
dashboard or that infographic? You can just sort of use a tool to do it quickly, but presumably it changes the calculus a little bit.
Well, it does, and if you've got also access, to the data sources. I mean, increasingly people do publish the data that they've used for. It's not universal by any means, but there's a good fraction of works that do come with the data set to say, you know, almost like check my workings. Here's the
Yeah.
source material, and almost like have a go. So, see what you can do. But it's an interesting thing because, like, going back to AI, I do think I don't know if it exists yet, but one of the great things, if it did exist, would be that if you could take a chart, even just as a PNG of a chart,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way to scrape the data from that, the values
Oh
of that data,
yes, please,
through
somebody.
the encodings reversed
Yes.
into a?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a super cool thing to have, and I'm sure it's achievable. It'd be even more fraught for accuracy, but
Yeah.
as a starter,
But
as
at
a
least
starter, it
close.
would
I
be.
mean, there is that tool plot digitizer, which I've never gotten to
No, I've not had
work
to go.
right. But yeah, even just to mock something up, to say,
Yeah.
hey, I would like to try this as a different chart, or just
Mm,
out of curiosity. Um, so your last comment makes me think about one other thing I want to ask you about. So let's go back to the Information is Beautiful Awards. You've got all of your trophies lined up behind you, and we've got the Data Viz Society has their conference Outlier coming up in
mm,
June. They have they now run the awards, and I'm curious, and I know we've talked about this in the past. I'm curious now how you feel or think about Data Viz Awards, and I'll caveat that because of the point you just made about the data,
yeah.
that you don't know what people have done with the data before
Yeah.
making the visualization. So that's sort of the
Yeah. Yeah. No,
motivation for that question.
it's a great point. I'm just trying to think. I think from memory, someone like Francis Gagnon as well has been pushing this button as well, which is if you're judging these things just on the aesthetics, then kind of make that the
Yeah.
goal of the awards. If it's about the work itself, then it needs to be a more sort of fundamental judgment of, is it faithful to the data? Is it
Yeah.
disguising things? But again, I think the awards, to me, I've always lent more on the side of not getting too wound up by the notion or the nature of awards for very subjective
Yeah.
products or works. And I think really, although you never want to be like not winning or like left out
Yeah.
the long list into the short list, I think it's probably best for most people's mindsets to probably just chill a little bit and just say, well, for those who win, it's a really nice thing, and
Yeah.
let them have it. For those who are judging, it's a pain because you're rattling through all these different works, you're limited in time. You start off very thorough with the first 5, and then you get into the 15 to 20. It's like, oh God,
Yeah.
I've seen enough now. And I think when, to be fair, the awards that you mentioned there, they do go to a really great efforts to get a load of eyeballs looking at
Yeah.
these. Not everyone looking at everything, but certainly a nice way to just cushion the idea it's not just one person looking at a piece. So again, with that language of it's the least worst way to do
Yeah.
this stuff. And
Yeah.
if you don't win, don't worry about it. If you do win, stick it on a top shelf on
Yeah.
for about 10
Yeah.
years, and then have ask questions about whether it needs to be dusted off and put away.
All right, sage advice from Captain Kirk. So we've talked a little bit about tools. We've talked about lots of different aspects of sort of today's data viz creation process. The one thing we haven't talked about is doing it within. This is I'm going to say right up front, by the way, this is a very good segue that I'm doing right now. We haven't talked about talked about creating data visualizations within a team or within an organization, and that's what your book sort of tries to help people do.
Yeah, what a bridge that is.
That's pretty good, right? That just came to me too. I had not planned that.
Yeah.
So third edition, right?
Yeah.
Third edition.
There's one here actually. Imagine
that. You've got it to hold up. Look at that. Now, folks listening, of course, can't see that, but they can imagine it because they all have it with that lovely, colorful swirl.
Circular thing. Yeah.
So what is the third? What is okay? So two-part question. What does a third edition do? And is it have you left things out from the first edition that people should be like, I need to get all 3? Like, is this now are you just trying to like just gain revenue, or like, yeah, what's the third edition doing?
What level of cynicalness is it? That's the thrust of the question. You know what? So I was asked quite a few Marches. I think it might be 3 years ago. I was asked to agree to do a third edition. And listen, this is all in the context of a niche marketplace. But the publishers, Sage, who have always been really nice. I've really enjoyed working with them. They asked me that because within their parameters, it's seen as a good seller. I'd never say bestseller, but it's worthy of a refresh from their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When I was asked, though, I was thinking, well, I don't really know what is new to warrant a third edition. But I had that as well with the second edition. Now, the second edition, in that case, it is often a little bit of a, well, let's say that the first book was a first draft. Can we do it properly this time?
Yeah.
Can we eradicate some of the inefficient language, which I definitely look back on and think, Jesus, I was chewing up some of those words there. But the third edition was interesting because actually, when you look at it from a distance, it is 5-6 years since the second edition, and I felt that in that 5 or 6 years, I've continued to evolve in my lens of what data viz means to me.
Yeah.
And you always want to update things with new examples and new reference points to reflect the new work and the new people doing the new work. So there is that part of it, definitely. But what I found actually interesting when I got into it last January, when I had 2 months left to do it, was that every page I was looking at I was seeing opportunities to either rephrase stuff, remove stuff, or add stuff that just felt new ways to express things. And the way that I've kind of concluded all this is that to me, it's the same house. If the book is a house, it's the same house, the same rooms. Those rooms still serve the same purpose, so the kitchen still exists as the kitchen. But I've ripped out a lot of the units and of the appliances. I've changed the wallpaper, changed the flooring. I've got rid of the shed, so that there is one bit I got rid of. So we got rid of the shed. That wasn't serving any purpose anymore. But yeah, the whole thing has just been almost, re-engineered, reconstructed. But it feels to me like a a bit of a leap forward in terms of how I think about the field and how I want to express the field.
Hmm.
I would say that the biggest, I never want anyone to spend more money on books from me if you've already got the books or one of the
Yeah.
books. There are some completists out there who I love dearly, but I would suggest that if you've got the first edition, there should be enough clear water to warrant possibly a third
Hmm.
edition if you've got a desire to kind of grow your bookshelf. I would always say buy someone else's book first if you feel that there's
Hmm.
something missing. Um, Maybe the second edition to the third edition, to an outside lens, isn't as big a gap as I see it.
Hmm.
Um, but I never want to prejudge how people want to spend their hard-earned money
Yeah.
on my products. But to me, it's more just those arriving into the field now, those for whom this is the
Hmm.
first book that they buy with me. I feel confident that yes, this edition is the latest version of me and my brain.
Right.
For others, it's up to them if they want to decide to jump onto a new edition. But it's an interesting challenge. I mean, you've done a second edition, right?
I have not.
Oh, you've just
We've
done
talked
different
about
books.
it. Yeah, and I've talked about doing a second edition of the Excel book, um, but that's a different game. That's because the technology and the tools have changed, and Excel itself has changed in lots of
Right.
different ways.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I haven't done it. But I'm curious. Aside from ripping out the shed, what's like in your mind? What's the and aside from I don't know, some of like the changes in language
Mm,
and
mm.
exposition. What's like the biggest? Yeah, what's the biggest renovation you did
Yeah.
to
The
the
biggest
house?
renovation is on the biggest chapter, which is the centerpiece chapter about charts. So
Mm-hmm.
that chapter has always acted as the almost in some respects the kind of standalone section where although you can go cover to cover, in most cases people are just referring to that as the gallery of chart options that in
Mm-hmm.
any given day they might just flick through and think, oh, it could be that, could be that, could be
Yeah.
that. In the past, I had, I don't know, something like 40 plus, maybe 48 charts organized by these five families that I tend to organize things into. But they were always different examples of each chart in terms of I might have asked someone to give me permission to use their Sankey diagram, and then
Right.
somebody else gave me permission to use their choropleth map, and
Yeah.
they were all very isolated examples that looked different in terms of style.
Mm-hmm.
They'd about different topics, but in this edition, what I've done, and it kind of came to my mind about 3 days before the chapter was due, I felt the need for greater flow from one page to
Okay.
the next, from one chart to the next. I felt the need not just to make them all look the same
Mm-hmm.
in terms of style and color palette and be made by me in the
Mm-hmm.
same tool, but also be about the same thing. And so what I found was,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, Flourish to me, um, I think by default, the free version of Flourish enabled me to make about 37 of the
Mm-hmm.
eventual 40 charts that I included. I had to
Yeah.
strip back to 40. There was a page length, a book page length
Yeah. Yeah.
issue
Right.
where I thought, right, 40. Um, I managed to make the other three with a little bit of a hack and a workaround, um, but I also did it on the same topic. It was all about Nobel laureates. There's a
Mm-hmm.
data set out there that gave me a really nice, neat data set, 1,000 records. Beautiful. Um, we had dates and categories and relationships and locations and quantification and stuff, and it just felt the perfect all-rounder that I could then just quickly pull together some ideas for 40 pieces of analyses for each of the 40 different chart types, so that
Yeah.
when you're reading the book chapter, you're not having to remind you, okay, so this thing's now about COVID, and this chart's now about sport, and this is about politics. It's all about the same thing. So it
Right.
should enable you not just to sort of follow the chapter through with a lot more efficiency and kind of gracefulness between pages, but also learn the language. This is the crucial thing to me. Learn the language of the questions that these charts answer, because they're the
Mm.
roles. And
Yeah.
if you start to interchange the language of, oh, well, is used Nobel laureate prize winner there, but that could be department, it could be sports team, it could be political party. You could interchange these objects in the language of the questions being answered. That gives readers that more um, that almost kind of that kind of flexibility to be able to say, okay, well, that was about Nobel laureates, but I can see now how that language applies to my workplace analysis case study just by changing some of these objects.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, and it's not unique to me by any means, but to me, language is so important in data viz. The thing you're trying to show, the thing you're trying to tell, the thing you're trying to answer comes before, in a sense, the chart you're picking. And so,
Yeah.
and actually going back to Chat GPT and the likes, that to me is potentially where there is a real role for these tools to be able to give people a sense of, if I want to show X statement
Yeah.
of analysis visually, which are the best charts, or which are the charts I could
Yeah.
consider using.
Yeah.
So I think that is, and it's a little bit like the whole basis of how Tableau is. Is it the kind of
Yeah. The show me
VizQL? I think it
tab.
was, yeah,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
show me
VizQL.
tab.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of underpinning of a lot of this stuff. The written constructs of what analysis you're showing. So that, to your question, that is the biggest change. It was
Mm,
the most amount of work to put into it, but it's the thing that I'm kind of most satisfied that I had the idea and sort of saw it through and didn't take the
mm-hmm.
shortcut, which was, oh no, just get loads of other examples and stick them in there and just go again.
Yeah.
So
It is an interesting balance, right? Like, should you go do it all yourself? Do you want to spend your time making them all yourself, or you want to spend your time asking people, and they have their pros and cons, and
yeah,
they're both just
licensing.
the yeah, the creation one is a little bit more fun,
Yeah, it is.
although a little bit more frustrating sometimes when you're just like, I just want to get these three charts done. It's
Yeah.
just, I gotta reshape my data once again. It's like, why?
I mean,
Uh,
there were points where I'm thinking this sunburst chart is just not interesting. but,
yeah,
yeah,
right. That's the
but I need to
thing.
show it as an example. So
Yeah. So we're almost done, and folks are like, folks are listening to this, are like, I got to get to work. But um, what did you do when you got to a point like, you create a chart, you've got this data set, you have this nice kind of story, I'll
mm,
call it a story, although it's loose.
mm,
And you come to a chart type and you're like, this is just not that interesting. Or you're
mm.
just like, it's okay because it's just, the point is to be illustrative, to like,
It is, yeah.
yeah,
That's the way that I kind of made peace with it, but also explained it in the book is that these 40 charts aren't revealing 40 groundbreaking pieces of analysis.
yeah,
I'd say
right,
there's about 7 that revealed something of interest to me. It's more a showcase of the method in practice based on real data to give you a sense of, if you're wanting to show this thing or answer this question, here's a method that will do the job for you.
gotcha. Okay, I have one last question for you. So when
Mm.
I first came in the field, you were already one of the big people on campus. And one of my goals was to get into visualizing data's, I think at that point it was a monthly newsletter, right? It was like the
It was
best
the
stuff that
best
you would,
of. It was the best
the
of.
best of.
Yeah, the blog
Right.
posts. Yeah.
Right. And so I got, I felt like once I got into one of those, I had sort of made it, right? That was my sort of goal. So now you've got now you've got your newsletter. I don't think I'm looking at it right now. Because it just gave me my thing. So I don't, you've got like separate sections. There's a section on visuals. It's not necessarily, you don't call it best of anymore, but whatever. How do people, there's someone out there who's like, I want to get into Andy's newsletter. Like what do they,
Oh,
what's
interesting.
their
Yeah.
way to do it? How do they
Well,
get in there?
the way to do it is, please don't email me to say, can I be in your newsletter?
That's it. That's the
This is,
number one thing. It's like, if you
yeah,
ask, you're out. Okay, I like it.
yeah.
I think it's a good criteria. Actually,
Um,
I do appreciate
but
that.
then I'm too soft to say no, you're out. I'll
Right,
find a way to get it.
right.
It's just make your work public. I mean, although we spoke earlier about the fragmentation of the data viz community,
Yeah.
good work will find its way to my eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I'm tracking everything, but I track people who track things, and they track things, and I use this kind of this sort of pyramid of sort of trusted eyeballs and curators that help me to get a sense of what's out there. But yeah, the newsletter is 50 things that I've encountered the last month. Now, I do encounter, when I kind of come down to my bookmarks, there's usually about 200 things there. So I do have to go through a process of in some respects, forming what I think is the best stuff of those 200. But sometimes it's just also variety of stuff. You might have 20 great pieces, but they're all about, for example, this month, you might have had 20 great pieces about the wildfires in California. Well, I'm not going to show 20 pieces about that, but I might show two, and then I'll move on to another topic. So it is extremely subjective and instinctive on the day, which the day was today, this morning. But it's something that I did drop off because I found it tremendously hard work, and it still remains hard work because I don't want to automate it. I don't want to outsource it. I want to kind of still do it myself because it gives it that extra edge of authenticity.
Right.
But I also, what I do find is that there are fewer works these days from slightly more independent producers. There is still a dominance of the news media because their work is very public and very shared amongst the public. So, if I said, don't email me if you've got a great piece that isn't getting traction, but it's of good quality.
Yeah.
Write me an email, but don't ask me to put it in. Ask me to consider.
All right, this is key. This is important stuff for people who are listening. This is key. This is the stuff that you only get on when you start listening.
But don't be offended or hurt if it doesn't make it, because it's not a reflection of the work. It might just be that month there's your Sankey diagram's great, but there's 10 others that have had to sift through. So it's just
well, and the other thing that you do, and I think you did this with the best of, right, with the monthly ones, is that you write whatever, like a sentence or two
little spiel,
on each of these things, which like that's taken a bunch of time. I mean, that's work.
It is. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I'm a bit lazy. I'll just grab the excerpt from the piece, but usually it's a good articulation of what it is anyway, so it's just other people's voice. But it'll be the thing that I've picked that matches why I might have included it. So
all right, so they can find you on visualizingdata.com with 2 S's.
All the S's.
All the S's.
There's no even though. We don't need to get into the even though.
No, we don't. Andy, always a pleasure.
Thank
great
you,
to
John.
See you.
Likewise, mate.
Thanks so much. See you. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with the one and only Andy Kirk. Make sure you check out his book. Make sure you check out his site, visualizingdata.com. And make sure you sign up for his newsletter. Comes out, I think, once a month or so with the best of the data visualization web. Definitely worth your time. So, until next time, actually next week, this has been the Policy Viz podcast. Thanks so much for listening.